Hey guys, Woods Farm here, just back out working on the Kubel wagon. So last time I left, it was just kind of an update. I've got the panels all cut for the back, for the top deck, the lid, and the engine hatch. I've got all the lines laid out. So I'm just waiting for help to do the roll the beads. It's kind of a two-person job. So I've just moved on to dealing with this fuel tank. There's the new fuel tank, and I'm going to mount it into basically the same position that the Kubel wagon tank would actually go. At the end of the day, that made the most sense. So I just got to come up with a system to hold it in place. So I'm doing a bracket here, and there's going to be on the back, you can see that white line. There's going to be probably a piece of angle that'll create a shelf, and then I'm going to have some bands that come from the back and around the front of the tank and go up, and they'll be adjustable, and that's what's going to clamp it in place. I went ahead and moved the reservoir for the brake fluid. I moved it over like 6-7 inches. It was okay. The tank wasn't coming over to the point where it was blocking it, but it was close. And I had played around with the idea of moving it to the other side, and ultimately I just decided to move it over a few inches. There's so many things going on that unless you have like a very specific set plan, you come into these issues. So I knew it needed to move over. I moved it, and then I realized that my plan, I had forgotten that the main wiring harness, I wanted it to go straight up, kind of from the side of the tunnel and straight up and into the area right there where the fuses and all that stuff's going to be. So I'm going to have to reroute that wiring over a couple inches, but just at this point it's just so hard to get everything perfect. So I'm going to settle with that. It'll work. So I had to go ahead and cut a notch in the firewall to allow the fill nozzle of the fuel tank to be in the correct position. The tank was specifically designed to allow the fuel nozzle to be in the right spot, and it needs to be in the right spot for a number of reasons. You have to have clearance for the windshield to be able to fold down and not cover it. I played around with the idea of just putting the nozzle, using a plastic tank that I had, and having the nozzle just kind of coming up through the hood wherever. But all these things need to work together. So there was obviously a reason why when they designed the Kubel wagon they had the fuel nozzle where it was. So I have to do the same thing to get the right look. Okay, so I managed to get the beads rolled today on the different panels. So the next step is to weld them together down the seam to make one solid panel, and then I'm going to attach it to the frame of the vehicle. There's two pieces for the hatch for the engine compartment, and there's also two pieces for the trunk lid. Again, they need to get welded into one piece, and then I have to deal with this distortion along the edge. This happened on the other panels. It's not a surprise. I just have to kind of flatten these out along the edge. I'm not sure how I'm going to do that just yet. And then as it gets welded with plug welds, it should flatten out. I'm probably going to have to make a frame out of bar stock for the trunk lid and the engine compartment hatch, just to help flatten out those edges. So we'll see. I'm going to experiment and kind of try a couple different things to see how to deal with that. But before I start attaching these panels, I actually have to make this piece that goes in here, and it's got the louvers for the airflow for the engine, because it's going to get attached and welded in place, and then these panels, the idea is they're going to get folded over top of it and welded down. I got the fuel tank basically set up in position. It's fairly easy to take this out. There's two bands that connect at the back. There's also a bar that forms a shelf that's adjustable up and down just to help tighten up and make sure nothing's rattling. Then there's a piece of framework here that creates a solid surface to cinch that fuel tank up against. The plan is everywhere where there's going to be metal banding touching the fuel tank, there's going to be rubber pads. So it's all roughed in. I'm pretty happy with it. So I just need to go back and actually weld these pieces in place and it will be ready. Hey guys, back working on the Kubel wagon. As you can see, I got the tires. This is the only one I've got mounted on a rim right now. These tires are 30 inches, and I actually think they're probably a little bit bigger than the original Kubel wagon tire. The Kubel wagon tire would have been on a 16-inch rim and probably a 28, 29-inch tire, I think. I'm sure some expert out there knows the exact dimensions. These are 15 rims. This is a 7x15 tire. This was the best anachronism I could come up with. They look good like this. I'm pretty happy. There is enough clearance with the arch of the fender. However, we ran into a little bit of a problem with these tires. It's kind of convenient that the hood isn't on and you can see what's going on here, but here's the inside, and the problem with the clearance comes right here. And obviously with the tires straight, everything looks good, but when you turn the tire to the inside, it's just touches. Depending on how the suspension's riding, it's about ½ an inch and or just kind of grazes the edge here. So there's a few solutions to dealing with this problem. Obviously, going down to a smaller size tire is the easiest thing. That said, I've kind of put out a lot of cash when it comes to buying rims and tires. These things are all mail order, kind of hard to return. Obviously, I can sell them on the used market, but I'd probably take a bit of a loss if I did that. And honestly, the tires look really good from, proportionately, and the tread pattern. So I'm going to try to do what I can to make this work. Some of the options include the steering box has a limiting, has an arm, and there's 2 bolts you can adjust that will affect the steering. So it's possible that we can just adjust that and we'll lose a bit of turning radius on the steering. Another option is to get some wheel spacers, and I was on CIP1.ca and they have some ½ inch wheel spacers. There's lots of room to bring the tire out, so that might actually change the geometry and might give me some clearance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do everything possible to make these tires work. And at the end of the day, if I get on the road and it's driving and it becomes an issue that they're just too big and there's not enough clearance, obviously I can go to a smaller tire. But for now, I'm going to try to make these work. Another drastic measure that I can take is that part of the framework in there. I can actually get in there and actually alter that potentially to give me a little bit more clearance. So there's a nice shot of it looking straight on. You can see how that tread pattern, I think it looks great. Generally the 30-inch diameter tire, it fits the proportions of the car really well. So again, when it comes to 15-inch rims, there's just not a lot of options out there for light truck tires with aggressive treads. In fact, a lot of the tire diameters are really 27, 28 inches. And, the tires I had on it are, I think, 25.5 and 26 inches, and they look too small. So when it comes to trying to get something that'll fit on the rim and, is affordable, you just don't have a lot of options. So that's one of the reasons why, you know, I went with these tires, and again, unfortunately, they're just a little bit too big, I think, but I'm going to try to make it work. So enough with the tires. I'm going to come back to that issue. The other 3 tires are out, getting put on the rims. I'm going to mount them, and like I said, we're just not going to know until I actually drive this thing around and try some of these different options to make them work. But I still have a lot of body work to get at. I'm just working on this top deck panel. What needs to happen, I have a lot of holes on this panel that need to get put around the outside, and these are for the plug welds. So that's what I'm working on today. Hopefully I'll get this thing welded in place. I have to revisit this center seam. This is really where my welding skills are not shining. This 20 gauge is really difficult to weld, so I got some sanding to do, and I have some body fill that's going to go in this, and hopefully I can make this seam more or less invisible. We'll see. So this is the panel that forms the lid for the trunk. I just gotta weld this seam. So I just made a couple practice welds. Actually, my first practice weld turned out better than the second one, but yeah, we're gonna go with this. I'm just gonna tack it and then start stitch welding it together, and hopefully we get a seam that is pretty smooth, and I'll be able to use some body fill to kind of finish it off. So there's a little bit of a kind of ridge on each side of the weld, and I've sanded it down as far as I dare. It feels fairly smooth, so I'm going to go ahead and try to fill the gaps. This is sort of experimental, so we're going to have to see how it turns out, but I'm going to try this stuff, metal reinforced filler. Okay, there's the seam with the body fill. You can't really see the crack anymore, it's kind of smooth, but as my wife pointed out, you can kind of feel it when you run your hand over, and she said that that's going to show through the paint, so she's usually right. That said, I'm going to give it a couple coats of primer and just see what it looks like, and if I have to, I'll go back and revisit it. But for now, I'm going to get this panel welded down in place. So my strategy is to start in the center and work my way out. You can see how every place where there's a rib, it's just kind of, there's just a little bit of a bow, and the ribs kind of also kind of bow towards the center, kind of swoop down, they curve. So I'm hoping that as I go out and weld this down, I'm going to use the rubber mallet and kind of tap it flat and clamp it down, and hopefully it straightens itself out. So we'll see how this goes. Okay, so the plug welds are getting good penetration into the frame, and my idea was to start in the center, work my way across, starting on one side, just because it's easier to have the welder and just be standing here and just work my way across. I think what is happening is, as I do that, everything's flattening out nice on this end or side, but as I do that, it seems like the plate's kind of shifting forward, and it's kind of running out of alignment here. You can see how the plate, the sheet metal is like just flush with the frame, and when I had it laid out, it was kind of maybe 1/8 of an inch in. So I think what I need to do to mitigate that problem is to actually weld both points, front and back, as I go across. So I'd be welding here, and then the next I'd move over, clamp, and weld here, weld here, clamp. That way everything is completely even as I go across. I think that will eliminate that. So I think right now I can correct the problem I haven't gotten that far, but when I go to start the other half, working from this side out, I'm going to do that technique. I'll do each side evenly as I go across, and we'll see if that works any better. So that's it. All in all, turned out pretty good, and I went ahead after I got the plug welds in. There was a lot of splatter, so I had to sand it. It's kind of, the sanding sort of washes out the ribs, but they're there. Anyways, went ahead and finished this edge now. So this got bent over. It makes a nice round, kind of smooth surface. So there's a few little pieces of welding that still need to happen right in here and here. This edge is not bent because this plate is going to fit here, and then it's going to bend over top of it. So got to make this plate before I go any further, but generally it's fairly flat and smooth. Turned out pretty well. Okay, so I'm just working on the lid for the trunk. This is the front edge. What I'm going to do here is I have a little bit of excess material, and I'm going to roll it around to make kind of a lip. The reason I want to do this is so there's not a sharp edge. People are going to be grabbing this, opening it, and closing it. I don't want a sharp edge there, and it's a nice way to finish it. Now this would be a lot easier if I had a brake, but I don't. So what I do have is a piece of 1/4 inch plate that on my welding table that's a fairly square edge, and I'm just working along a line that I've drawn on here, and I'm bending it over at 90 degrees. Once I get it to 90 degrees and it's even all along the edge, then I'll flip it over and I'll be able to fold it over. So there's going to be a fold there, which creates a kind of a smooth edge. So if all goes well, you should have like roughly a 90-degree angle along the edge. And now you can just take this on a flat surface and fold it back. Okay, there's the hatch basically done. So it looks like from the inside. So this is basically like the trunk. It's going to get a piano hinge along the seam on the back. I'm probably going to roll this edge, and it overlaps a little bit on each side, including the front. There's a little handle. There's supposed to be a sunken recess and a handle. I'm going to do kind of a raised steel handle. It's just a bit easier. So I have to repeat the process now for the engine hatch, and I need to do the vent on the top. And then I'm going to move on to the hood, which requires, basically it's just a sheet. An actual Kübelwagen has a little rounded hump here that gave you clearance for the oval fuel tank. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do a flat sheet. I know some of the purists are going to complain, but a heck of a lot easier, and it's a really small detail, I think. I haven't decided one way or the other, but either way, the hood, and it needs the tire mount, and there's these kind of 3 or 4, there's an X, kind of a raised reinforcement piece. I have to make those. The last thing I'm going to do is the doors. I might even actually do the doors and paint them separately and then weld them on after. I'm not 100%. But that's it for body work.